Hi and welcome to this next tutorial video for Beyond the Square. In this video I'm going to show you how to cross stitch on a piece of crochet. If, like me, you've also been cross stitching for years, this should come quite naturally to you, as a basic piece of doubled crochet, a swatch does resemble very much a cross stitch canvas with the holes. And the idea is exactly the same. So this is going to be used for one of the squares in this month's cow. So what you need to do is, and I've used this lovely yellow bubbly yarn as it's a nice contrast to the blue, so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I've put the first one in for you. So I'm using a smaller hook than what I used to crochet the swatch, just so it doesn't pull the stitches out and you can easily put it through the little gaps that are still left without distorting the piece of crochet, because if you use the same size hook it tends to leave bigger holes. You can of course use a tapestry needle or just a large needle if you can find one to fit the wool through. That works just as well. So what you need to do is leave yourself a very long tail, because this is what you're going to be pulling through rather than the main ball of yarn. So roughly, depending on the amount of stitches, you're better off having more than you need than less, because you can always tie it off and cut it at the end rather than having too little, because then you'll have more knots and have to weave more ends in the back. And that's really what you want to avoid. You just want to have to weave it once. You will have a front and a back to this piece. The back will look slightly messier than the front, just because you're changing places of where you put your stitches. And the only other point to note on this is that ideally you want all the bottom stitches of a piece of a cross stitch to go in one direction and the top stitches to go in the other direction. It is a lot more, it is a lot easier to swap and change the directions as you go across, but it can make the work look a bit messy, and that is pretty much a fundamental rule of all cross stitch, is that you have all the top stitches going one way. It doesn't matter, you can choose which way. I've just happened to do this one left to right. You can do it the other way around. I think right-handed people tend to do it this way and left-handed people tend to do it the other way, but don't quote me on that. So also some people with their techniques, and I don't do this, but a lot of people will do all the bottom stitches first and then go back and do all the top stitches. I prefer to do the whole stitch. That's just personal preference. I think you'll find people who've been cross-stitching before will tend to do it that way, but I've always done it both ways first. So this is the start of a stitch, and what you're going to use is the actual stitches themselves, not the gaps. So I've pulled the yarn through here from the top of the stitch over the one that we're crocheting on. So the pattern that you're going to get a chart that shows exactly what stitch you want the cross over, and a row by row written instruction with the number of the stitch that you're going to be crocheting over. So it will be read top to bottom, row by row, left to right. So this will be row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, etc. Excuse me. So if the chart or the written instructions said row 2 stitch 3, that would be this stitch here. So what you're going to do is pull the yarn through. As you can see, this is the top of the third stitch where you would normally do your next crochet stitch in. For cross stitch, you're going to go into the stitch before it, pull your yarn through, and then go through the stitch that the next stitch was crocheted into. So you're pulling the yarn through the top of stitch 2 and the top of stitch 4 on the row below. So it's completely across that third stitch, and then you will just reverse it to get it the other way. So here you've done the top of stitch 2, here you're going to do the top of stitch 4. I you can get the hook in there, and pull the yarn through all the way through. You will be working with a long tail. So through the top of stitch 4 and then back in through the bottom of stitch 2 here, through the other side to pull the yarn through. There we go. And that is your first cross stitch, and that goes completely over stitch 3. Now, depending on where your next stitch is, if you wanted to do one on the bottom, you would follow exactly the same process, but obviously just bear in mind that your yarn is pulled through this last stitch. So if you pull it back through there and try and put it through here, this stitch will come undone. So you need to start at the bottom for this one and go up that way, and then through here and through that stitch. So it's basically like a backwards version, and this will alternate depending on where your stitches are. Obviously if you've got a gap, that doesn't matter, it's just if you're doing adjoining stitches, but that's how you do it. If you have been crocheting, crocheting and cross stitching for a long time, if you have a preferred technique and can figure out the holes that you want to use, it does come naturally to some people, then please use your technique and how you do it, whether you do all the bottom stitches first, the top stitches first, however you want to do it. You could of course have gone in through this stitch here, but it made the stitch look very narrow and it didn't quite look right, which is why I've gone in the 4th stitch so that it covers, so nothing is in that whole stitch, it's all covered up basically by this cross stitch. And obviously if you had another stitch on this 4th one, you would overlap a little bit and go in through the 3rd stitch, pull your yarn over and go in through here, which is pretty much what you would do on a normal cross stitch canvas. You'd be going in the same holes twice. So it should look ideally like an immaculate piece of cross stitch, but on a piece of crochet instead of a canvas. So I hope this helps with the square that this is for in this month's cowl. There will be a few squares that use this technique, so if you have trouble with it, or you want to ask any questions, or you need any more advice, or you want me to do a more in-depth tutorial, then please leave comments below. Find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. I'm on all of them. I will get back to you as soon as possible. There is quite a lot of interest in this cowl, so I'll try my best. Please also remember to subscribe. This is the last tutorial video in this group, so please subscribe, and what will happen is you'll get notifications for when the next one's up, so you should be able to see what techniques we'll be using in next month's, or the next star signs batch of squares before the squares are actually released. So it's a little bit of a sneak preview, but obviously that will only happen if you subscribe. So good luck. I hope you enjoy these first three squares, and I look forward to seeing all of your pictures in the group.